Urgent. Stop what you're doing because the rainfall about to hit Britain will create the worst flooding disaster we've seen this decade. Atmospheric rivers are converging to deliver rainfall totals that will overwhelm every flood defense system across England and Wales. This isn't just heavy rain. We're witnessing a precipitation apocalypse that's about to submerge entire valleys and urban areas. Starting tonight, moisture-laden storm systems are delivering rainfall so intense it's reaching 50 millimeters per hour with nowhere to drain. But here's what will absolutely terrify you. This biblical rainfall is just the first wave of something truly catastrophic building upstream. By tomorrow afternoon, multiple river systems will reach levels that flood management agencies have never recorded in modern history. Picture this. Thames levels surging beyond all barriers, while northern rivers burst their banks, creating the ultimate flood emergency. This water catastrophe will trigger everything from evacuations to infrastructure collapse happening simultaneously across river valleys. From Yorkshire to Somerset, from Cumbria to Kent, virtually no river system will escape the reach of this flood revolution. And here's the devastating reality. The rainfall totals we're tracking are so extreme, they're breaking every historical precedent. I'm talking about 200 millimeters plus rainfall in 24 hours, creating conditions that will redefine flood risk maps permanently. But first, let me reveal what's developing right now. Drop your location because I'll personally respond with evacuation routes for your area. Our radar imagery looks like a water bomb that's completely saturated the atmosphere, creating multiple deluge zones across Britain. As I speak, Wales is already experiencing 40 millimeters per hour rainfall. If you're in valleys, evacuate to higher ground immediately. Manchester residents, this hits you around 2 a.m. tonight. Move vehicles to elevated areas because flash flooding will overwhelm drainage instantly. Leeds and Sheffield, you're next in line Wednesday morning. Prepare for river surges because this deluge could breach all defenses. Birmingham and Wolverhampton, brace yourselves and secure basements. Rainfall rates above 45 millimeters per hour will flood urban areas instantly. If you live in floodplains or near rivers, evacuate now because 200 millimeters rainfall will turn streams into raging torrents. York and Hull residents, your flood defenses weren't designed for this. Consider evacuation because river levels will exceed all records. Now here's where this story takes a catastrophic turn that even veteran flood specialists are calling absolutely unprecedented. While urban areas face flash flooding, rural areas are experiencing something that defies all logic for British rainfall. We're tracking accumulation rates that exceed soil absorption capacity. I'm talking about surface water creating instant rivers. Somerset levels, Gloucestershire, and Worcestershire are forecast to experience flood depths that haven't been seen in human memory. Tewkesbury and Evesham might face flood isolation for days as river confluences create massive water retention areas. Carlisle and Lancaster could see Cumbrian rivers converging into unstoppable flood surges that overwhelm all containment systems. This is the kind of setup that creates permanent landscape changes, and we're witnessing it develop in real time. Are you seeing how catastrophic this is? But here's what hydrological models discovered that's absolutely mind-blowing about Wednesday through Friday. A monster atmospheric river is stalling over Britain. And when it reaches maximum intensity, all drainage systems will be overwhelmed. Chester and Shrewsbury, you're ground zero for this water explosion that begins Tuesday night and doesn't relent. European and British flood models are showing terrifying convergence, which gives us devastating confidence in these inundation predictions. Scenario 1 puts Worcester and Hereford right in the most dangerous flood confluence, where multiple rivers exceed capacity simultaneously. Scenario 2 extends this flood nightmare into Thames Valley, putting Reading and Windsor in unprecedented flood territory. Gloucester and Cheltenham could experience the most dramatic water emergency imaginable, from normal conditions to complete submersion. Oxford and Abingdon, here's what you need to know. You could face either river flooding or surface water inundation, so evacuate immediately. For those in Maidenhead and Marlow, you're positioned catastrophically. Prepare for whatever this flood unleashes, because it's approaching fast. London residents activate flood emergency plans because Thames levels could threaten areas that have never flooded in modern history. Now here's the part that's going to absolutely horrify you about these water levels we're forecasting. We're looking at the most sustained high rainfall event in modern British meteorological history. Some locations will experience 50 millimeters plus per hour for 6 consecutive hours. That's not supposed to happen in temperate climate zones. This kind of rainfall intensity is what creates the flood disasters that submerge entire communities permanently. The atmospheric moisture content is literally overwhelming British drainage infrastructure, creating conditions that exceed design capacity. And here's what makes this even more catastrophic. The timing couldn't be worse for millions of British residents. This hits during midweek when people are commuting and schools are open, maximizing exposure to deadly flood conditions. London Underground, Birmingham Metro, and Manchester trams should prepare for complete system closure and potential tunnel flooding. Motorways from the M25 to the M40 could become impassable rivers, where vehicles are abandoned and drivers require water rescue. Railway systems across river valleys are already suspending services because floodwaters will undermine track foundations. Emergency services are preparing for the largest water rescue operation in British history as flood zones expand rapidly. But wait, there's more, and this is where the forecast gets even more unbelievable and potentially deadly. Before I reveal what happens when rivers reach peak levels, tell me in the comments, what's your flood evacuation plan? I read every single comment and respond with specific water safety advice for your elevation and proximity to waterways. The latest flood modeling just revealed something that's making water authorities across Britain issue emergency evacuation orders. We're talking about a system that could simultaneously produce flash flooding and sustained river inundation. Here's a critical question. How prepared is your property for potentially the largest flood event in British recorded history? Staines and Egham are sitting in the most dangerous position possible, where Thames tributaries and main river will converge. Taunton and Bridgewater need to activate total evacuation protocols as this water catastrophe engulfs Somerset's river network. Even London's Thames barrier may prove insufficient. Greenwich and Woolwich could see flood levels that exceed barrier capacity. Here's what's absolutely fascinating about the hydrological dynamics we're observing across British watersheds right now. For a rainfall event covering such massive drainage area, this level of simultaneous saturation is almost hydrologically impossible. It's because multiple weather systems are stacking atmospheric moisture into one concentrated precipitation bomb. Are you understanding the catastrophe here? For rainfall this intense over this area, our drainage wasn't designed to cope. If you're wondering why flood defenses will fail, it's because sustained rainfall exceeds every historical design parameter. Here's what separates survival from catastrophe. Understanding when water becomes a genuine, life-threatening emergency. If you live anywhere near rivers or in floodplains, evacuate vulnerable areas immediately because flash flooding can be instantly deadly. Underground parking and basement areas, here's your warning. Abandon these spaces because water accumulation will trap occupants. Low-lying coastal areas move to higher ground immediately or face potentially life-threatening combined river and tidal flooding. Emergency services across Britain should activate water rescue protocols because flood emergencies will overwhelm normal response capacity. This represents a multi-region water disaster that could paralyze emergency response across river basins. Now here's something that's going to terrify you about what this flood means for critical infrastructure. If you haven't secured essential documents and valuables, do it right now. I want you to establish higher ground storage immediately. This isn't just dangerous weather, it's a complete threat to ground-level infrastructure that will affect utilities permanently. We could be witnessing the most destructive flood event in British history if people don't evacuate vulnerable areas immediately. The water volumes from 200 millimeters plus rainfall are coming from atmospheric moisture patterns that exceed British historical records. Tropical level precipitation intensity is creating perfect conditions for infrastructure inundation beyond normal British flood tolerance. Canterbury and Maidstone could experience dangerous River Medway levels that make Kent River systems completely impassable. Norwich and Great Yarmouth might see River Yar flooding that affects Norfolk's entire eastern drainage system. Exeter and Plymouth should prepare for unprecedented southwestern river surges as rainfall overwhelms Dartmoor drainage. The infrastructure implications will persist long after water recedes, potentially affecting British transportation systems for months. This is exactly why you need professional flood safety guidance during extreme and dangerous water events like this. Social media flood myths and amateur water safety advice create deadly confusion when swift water survival is at stake. The complexity of flood hydraulics requires years of engineering and emergency response education to interpret correctly. Professional expertise becomes absolutely critical when water levels exceed what British flood management was designed for. This is why I always emphasize following flood authorities and water rescue services for information that could save your life. Drop your exact location in the comments right now if you want specific evacuation strategies for your flood risk level. I personally respond to location requests with detailed water safety plans. The most requested location gets dedicated coverage tomorrow. But here's the crucial question I need you to answer. Are you taking this flood emergency seriously or hoping water will drain? Let me know your honest flood preparation level, because potentially deadly water requires immediate evacuation decisions. If this flood breakdown helped you understand the danger, smash that like button and subscribe immediately for life-saving updates. Your engagement helps us reach people who desperately need reliable flood safety information during extreme events like this. Hit that notification bell right now so you don't miss critical evacuation advice during this potentially historic flood disaster. Ring the bell immediately, because when floodwaters reach maximum levels, you'll need every update to protect your family. We're also launching our emergency flood monitoring network that will provide real-time water level readings across danger zones. Check out our flood safety channel for continuous monitoring and live evacuation center locations when official resources are overwhelmed. This network will be invaluable during events like this when normal communication systems fail and emergency shelter becomes critical. Flood alerts and evacuation information are being updated constantly to help you stay safe during dangerous water events. The link is in the description below, and trust me, you'll absolutely need these resources during the coming flood catastrophe. This week, we'll test everything we know about surviving extreme flooding as multiple dangerous systems affect Britain simultaneously. Stay high, stay dry, and we'll monitor every dangerous water level in this unprecedented flood pattern together. Remember, floodwaters can become deadly within seconds, so continuous monitoring from rescue services isn't helpful. It's essential for survival. One more time, drop your exact location in the comments and tell me what elevation and flood resources you have available. I'm waiting to help you survive what's coming to your exact area. Don't miss tomorrow's critical flood safety broadcast. Before we finish, let me address the life-threatening reality. Why this week's flooding is so much deadlier than normal British rain. This combination of rainfall rate, duration, and geographic coverage creates water accumulation that British drainage isn't designed for. Most British rainfall is either brief, moderate, or distributed enough that natural and artificial drainage can handle the volume. This week delivers the deadly combination of intense rainfall with geographic saturation that overwhelms all water management systems. The meteorological setup includes atmospheric moisture that exceeds evapotranspiration and soil absorption rates completely. Surface water accumulation reaches dangerous levels within minutes, preventing normal human escape from rapidly developing flood zones. Urban drainage systems will experience backflow effects that send floodwater into supposedly safe above-ground areas. River systems will exceed containment capacity simultaneously, creating converged flood zones that eliminate safe evacuation routes. And here's something most people don't realize about flash flooding. The speed of water accumulation prevents rational emergency response. Minute 1 shows surface puddling. Minute 5 creates stream formation. Minute 10 generates dangerous currents. Minute 15 becomes deadly. We're not talking about gradual water rise that people can monitor. This is rapid inundation that requires immediate evacuation decisions. The speed of 50 millimeters plus per hour rainfall means emergency response systems never get preparation time necessary for effective rescue coordination. For families in flood-prone areas or ground-level housing, water management becomes a second-by-second survival responsibility. The compounding effects of rapid flooding mean that hesitation strategies result in eliminated evacuation options within minutes. Emergency services not prepared for simultaneous multi-site water rescue may become unavailable exactly when people need them desperately. Transportation evacuation routes could become impassable flood channels, trapping people in areas that seem safe initially. Communication infrastructure might fail under water damage, creating information blackouts exactly when emergency coordination is critical. Now let's talk about something crucial that mainstream flood sources won't mention: the psychological impact of rapid water rise. Flash flooding above ankle deep creates panic responses and decision-making paralysis that affect human survival reflexes. This flood event will create trauma responses that go beyond water danger into genuine psychological emergency territory. There's documented evidence linking flood exposure to post-traumatic stress, depression, and long-term anxiety about weather events. Children and elderly residents may experience terror responses that prevent rational water safety decision-making during emergency evacuation. Adults responsible for family safety face overwhelming time-pressure decisions when safe areas become flood zones rapidly. This creates cascading psychological effects beyond the immediate physical dangers of floodwater exposure itself. For communities unaccustomed to serious flooding, collective panic responses become critical factors in effective emergency evacuation. Maintaining calm evacuation procedures with neighbors isn't just helpful during this event, it's essential collective survival strategy. Emergency services will face unprecedented call volumes for water rescue emergencies and psychological crisis interventions simultaneously. Public evacuation centers will become essential psychological refuges that many British communities have never needed to operate before. Here's your essential action plan for surviving this flood emergency. And this is where preparation becomes literal life protection. First, identify high ground evacuation routes from your current location now. Find multiple paths to elevated areas above flood zones. Move essential items and vehicles to higher elevations immediately because floodwater accumulation will happen faster than evacuation. Prepare emergency communication methods because normal phone service and internet may fail during rapid flooding periods. Stock emergency supplies at elevated locations because ground-level storage will become inaccessible during flood inundation. Plan immediate evacuation triggers based on rainfall rates rather than water levels because flash flooding develops too rapidly. Coordinate with neighbors to create flood monitoring systems for ensuring no one becomes trapped during rapid water rise. Prepare waterproof emergency kits because flood evacuation often requires wading through contaminated water to reach safety. Consider tomorrow's travel as potentially impossible because flood conditions will close transportation systems completely and dangerously. Secure pets and livestock at elevated locations because domestic animals face identical drowning dangers with fewer evacuation options. Most importantly, accept that normal ground-level activities become impossible when water levels exceed human safety limits. This is what makes British flood culture so dangerous. Our collective inexperience with water that rises faster than escape. The shared experience of surviving rapid flooding creates community resilience, but also exposes our drainage infrastructure failures completely. We're all learning together how to evacuate from water accumulation that British drainage was never engineered to handle. Regional differences in elevation will create flood survival inequities between river valley residents and higher ground communities. Urban areas with storm drainage may experience sewer backflow, while rural areas face stream formation in unexpected locations. River valley communities will experience concentrated flood impacts, while elevated areas become essential evacuation destinations. Coastal regions might experience combined river and tidal flooding that eliminates typical inland evacuation routes completely. Transportation corridors following river valleys may become flooded evacuation death traps rather than escape routes to safety. Before I sign off, let me give you one final piece of advice that will maximize your survival of this flood emergency. Don't just monitor this flooding, evacuate preemptively, because water rescue becomes impossible when currents develop rapidly. Extreme flooding like this reminds us that despite modern drainage, we're still vulnerable to water accumulation beyond infrastructure limits. Take time to recognize flood danger signs because water accumulation symptoms develop slowly, then accelerate into lethal currents. Pay attention to how rain affects drainage systems. Backup, overflow, and surface streaming indicate dangerous accumulation rates. Notice how water flow affects roads and walkways because pavement flooding signals that natural absorption has been overwhelmed. These environmental responses are nature warning you that rainfall accumulation is approaching dangerous levels requiring immediate evacuation. Share flood survival strategies with others because collective water safety knowledge strengthens entire community evacuation effectiveness. Help vulnerable neighbors who may lack transportation because flood emergencies often require community-wide mutual evacuation assistance. Document this flood event for future reference because rainfall patterns suggest extreme flooding will become increasingly frequent. And remember that this flood connects you to communities worldwide, learning to survive increasingly extreme precipitation events. This is bigger than just weather. It's adaptation to the reality of extreme flooding becoming part of British climate. So evacuate immediately, monitor constantly, and recognize that surviving flooding like this requires treating it as the emergency it is. I'll be tracking every millimeter of this flood emergency and sharing survival updates as this dangerous pattern reaches peak intensity. Until tomorrow's flood aftermath coverage, prioritize high ground and evacuation above everything else during Britain's most dangerous flood event. Thank you for taking this flood emergency seriously, and I'll see you tomorrow when we assess exactly how Britain survived unprecedented water levels.